All right. Hello, hello.
Hello.
Hi, thanks for joining us. A strong IAM program is the backbone to a successful zero trust architecture. I feel like we're basically preaching to the choir, right, because it's Identiverse. But we also have lessons learned because Kevin and I are working on a zero trust migration for a very large client. So I think you'll enjoy our show a little bit. So a little bit about us. My name is Christine Owen. I'm a director at Guidehouse. We are a management consulting firm. I focus mainly on IAM integrations, and also as I've said, I'm doing a pretty large zero trust migration right now. And I'll pass it over to Kevin.
Hey, good afternoon. My name's Kevin Shaw, also with Guidehouse, a director, and Christine's kind of our identity SME, so all the identity-focused stuff, she kind of brought me along for a slightly different perspective. I'm more IT program management, enterprise deployment, system management from that perspective. And we've been collaborating really well on a lot of these projects, because Zero Trust is moving quick. We've got people coming with all the identity expertise, but a lot of it really requires that integration across all the different horizontals, the different groups, and really looking at it from a program aspect. So that's going to be some of the things I'll bring to the table.
Yes. So everyone needs a Kevin Shaw in their life. He's very important for me because I got very excited and I said, all right, we get to a zero trust posture. I can't wait. And then, Kevin had to step in and say, well, we have to work on change management and some other things. So Kevin's very important in my life. All right. So traditional versus zero trust architecture. I think it's really important to kind of sit down and talk about what is the differences or what are we talking about. So on a traditional security model, you have that moat of a firewall, right? And you allow for a lateral movement. You tend to authenticate once in, maybe use username, password, hopefully not, but a lot of people do. And then you get to move around laterally. Maybe you even get to come in as both a privilege and general user on the same credential. Oh my gosh, my heart's dying right now. So that tends to be what the traditional security model is today. Zero trust architecture, I would say it's generally the same rules of IAM principles that we really want to have within a cybersecurity program, but we're breaking it apart and we're creating that microsegmentation. So instead of that traditional model where I have my lateral movement, I break it up like little pieces of peanut brittle. I maybe eat a little bit for myself, but I have an application here, I have an application here, and each time a user needs to get into one of the different applications, they have to do some sort of re-authentication, some sort of reproving that they are who they say they are. So we have a bit of a checklist here. These are my favorite. I created this probably like a year ago. Ironically, I actually hate the term zero trust. I think it's too much of a buzzword. But I think zero trust is very important because I've learned to embrace it because everyone wants to do zero trust now. But zero trust is really just strong identity principles. So the first one, never trust, always verify. Always authenticate before you get access into that application. What kind of authentication do we want to do? We want contextual authentication. We want to look at the full picture of a person and the user. So we want to get that strong authentication from that user, preferably something that's phishing resistant, like a FIDO token, PKI, maybe a WebAuthn. Those are kind of the best categories for an internal user. We want to use that, but then we also want additional signals. So we want maybe a certificate from the device or a watermark. Maybe we want to know what the device health looks like. Maybe we want to know what the IP address is. Maybe we want to know what the past user history is, whether that user tends to come in at 2 a.m. on a Friday evening or if it looks a little fishy. So we want to do that contextual authentication, get as much information available and authenticate. The next one kind of also dives into that, continually monitor and log and use an analytics perspective to be able to say, all right, I have seen, Christine come in multiple times now. This is her pattern. This works really well. Wait a minute. Why is she signing in from Croatia? Something is wrong. Maybe she's on vacation. I don't know. Or maybe that's not actually her. So then we want to do a couple of checks. Maybe ask Christine to re-authenticate, present a strong token to be able to say, yes, no, this is who I say I am. Adhere to the principles of least privilege, least functionality. Least functionality is when you get that microsegmentation, we close all available routes into the application or that segmented network, except for one if possible, maybe two because you need to break glass sometimes, but one to get in and out, right? The second one is least privilege. So I, Christine, should never come in as a privileged user. Not only because I'm not trustworthy enough, you never want me to actually attempt to do something for you. I will break it. Kevin can admit I break his Excel spreadsheets all the time. But if you do want me to come in as a privileged user, you should actually want me to come in as a general user first and then have me do some sort of re-authentication to prove that I should be a privileged user. Utilize end-to-end encryption. Yes, please, definitely. Also, encryption at rest and in transit. All the encryption things. And then finally, micro-segment network systems and applications. That's that peanut brittle we've been talking about. Very important to make sure we do that so that we reduce the amount of lateral movement within the security, within the network, which really is what Zero Trust is, right? We want to reduce lateral movement. Identity is the key to all of this. So perimeter really does become identity. You have to prove that you are who you say you are each time you go into an application. That means that contextual authentication becomes that important perimeter to get you into where you're trying to go. Now, this sounds very friction-full. I understand that because you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to present my credential every single time I go in. That's not what we're thinking here. What we're thinking is you definitely need to authenticate at least once every 12 hours per NIST. But then after that, you use all the different device level signals. So if you're in application A on device A and application B that you attempt to get into, but there's a device that the system's never seen before that's attempting to get into that application, there's probably something wrong. So we're using that contextual authentication to decide whether you should get in to where you're going. Remote identity proofing enhances identities. This is really more for the B2B customers, not necessarily for your internal users, because you likely have already done some sort of strong proofing to bind that identity to your credential, to your user credential. But what we're looking for there is if, for example, I work at a law firm and I need to allow other attorneys in to review a case, I want to make sure that those attorneys are who they say they are before they review that case, right? Because there's actually ramifications for the law firms if they allow that client information to be given to someone who should not have access. And so in that case, doing remote identity proofing makes you have a stronger ability to say that likely is who they say they are, and also here's a strong credential, a phishing resistant credential perhaps, and also contextual authentication, which are both crucial. Both I've been talking about. So the next one is automated identity governance rules to control access. So identity governance is really important, and it's actually very helpful. If you have a strong identity governance program and you have internal users and you create them and you put them in your directory, then you can create birthright access to those general users, which means that those users automatically have access to all of the things that your organization needs to give them access to. If you add attributes to those users as well, then you can also say, oh, Christine's from HR, she should have access to this HR system as well because that's what she does. Maybe I'm a supervisor in HR, and so therefore I should have privilege access to the HR system. So an automated IGA tool will allow for that to happen without that friction of PDFs, emails, questions, finding the right person, all the things. So it enables you to be able to have your workforce actually do their work on day one. The last one is loss prevention protects data and privacy. I see identity and access management as being the enabler to protect data and to protect privacy. So what that means is I want to use IAM to make sure that people do not have access to the data that they should not have access to. And on the flip side, so that we can tag that data and make sure that that data doesn't get moved outside of the system. So we want to make sure we don't have that data loss. So all these things, these are great identity tools to get you to zero trust. So this is one of my favorites. So this is an overview of how we actually get that, right? So I have a user, that's number one on the list, and she wants to get into one of the applications that says 6. So what does she need to do? Well, she needs to log into her endpoint, likely a laptop. And when she's doing that, she's hitting the IDP. And that IDP is saying, yep, you used your strong credential. You are likely who you say you are. That endpoint device also has, as I've said before, certificates, watermarks on it that can authenticate that device to another place. And it also likely has agents on it because we're doing a full cybersecurity program here. And endpoint detection and response agent will let us know how clean that laptop is and make sure that that laptop should actually be added into the network and should interact with the network, right? So we have all of the information 4, 2, and 3, and we add that into what I call the zero trust broker. So there are many products out there that can act as the zero trust broker, and really all it is we're aggregating all of that really good data that we have about the user, the devices, the IP address, past user history, all of those fun things that we need to know, and it aggregates it and creates a risk score, and it says, you know what? Christine, that user, she probably is who she says she is. She's coming on the device that's clean, that we are used to seeing, from an IP address that we're used to seeing, around the same time periods that we're used to seeing her come in. And she has a strong credential. Maybe even she has some good attributes that the IDP passed over as well. At the policy decision point, the PDP, I'm going to say, that's probably her. We're going to let it go. Thumbs up. So then I move over to the policy enforcement point, where I think of it as like this encrypted tunnel, and then there's a locked door, and the policy enforcement point says, wait a minute, yep, you're allowed in, opens the door because the decision point says this is likely is who she says she is, and boom, I get into all these fun applications within my enterprise. So I really like this. This, to me, is the user workflow to how you get in to an application using zero trust. And of course, it's a dotted line because it's not all within the same firewall. It's just this is the entirety of the system. Yes, Rob? EDR, endpoint detection and response. All right. Oh, now we're on to Kevin. Next slide.
All right.
Finally, this is the more fun stuff.
And I got more time than we had in rehearsal, so this is fantastic. So as you can see, Christina has a lot of passion about this. So when like the executive order came out on the federal side, she's ready to go. And we started talking through, okay, how do we get there? And just so you know, I do mostly federal support. So, this has a definite federal slant on it. I've been assured this also applies in commercial, but we can certainly talk through a lot of that as we go forward. There's a lot of great resources out there. CISA's got the maturity model, DoD's got a reference architecture, NIST has got a great, overall process. The main thing that we took away from this, your implementation is unique to your organization, your needs, your priorities, your legacy infrastructure that you have to figure out how this is all going to work with. So it's really not a prescriptive method. It's an overarching approach that you have to work with and figure out how to apply best. It's not one size fits all. So we're going to go through, this is loosely based on kind of the NIST approach, but we added in a few things, and I'll just talk through what we kind of learned as we went through the process. I think the first step is the one that I think is kind of most critical, is establishing who that zero trust team is, that core group that's going to work across a lot of these different groups, coordinated and really make it successful. We've seen some customers of ours that'll basically say, hey, I know there's different pillars. Let me give each pillar what they're supposed to work on. They're going to figure it out, and it's going to come together into the zero trust utopia. What we find out is there's different technical approaches based on your perspective. There's funding discussions because not everybody's going to get their funding at the same time. So you really need some group that sits across to say, what are we trying to do as a collective? What makes the most sense? How do I adjudicate and prioritize across? And really kind of champion this as we work to educate, keep things streamlined, and get everybody on the same page. That's kind of what we think is step one. Step two is understanding, what you know about your environment. Do I know all the identities? Do I have external people that aren't proofed? A lot of the government world, you got CAC cards and PIV cards, but then you also have like grantees, external users, other places where you may not have the same proofing. Where do I also have gaps? Or maybe I don't know all the users. It's an open source, but where are my visibility gaps? Inventorying your systems, your networks, your data, your identities, really getting that good picture of what your environment is and what you don't know accurately, where you maybe have data integrity problems. Next step is understanding your current technology. Everybody's invested in a lot of these tools. You probably have a lot, and you've only used a portion of the capability. It's really good to go back, look at what else they can do, how do these things work together before we start looking at introducing a bunch of new technology and thinking technology is going to fix it. Understand that portfolio. Number 4, critical business processes and use cases. When I think we first looked at this, is understand all the way we interpret it, may not be the way it was intended, but you understand all your processes and all the details. That'd be fantastic. But a lot of groups are so large, there's so many, you're not going to get to all the details. So get as much as you can, get the critical ones understood so you can really have a meaningful discussion is a good first step, and then you can layer and kind of build upon it. And I think the next piece we'll get to later is, you're going to learn more as you go. So just be prepared for that learning cycle as you kind of go through the zero trust process. Understand your policy and compliance documents. In the federal government, understand the executive order, timelines, if your organization responded, what they said they were going to do when. Also understand what internal policies you have that may conflict with what you're going to do with zero trust. Understanding all those factors will help you figure out where the best bang and where some of the biggest risks are that you want to undertake. And then the last one is prioritize your evolution. And it's really an evolution. I don't think many organizations are just able to buy a bunch of stuff, implement it, and we're now in zero trust. It's going to be an incremental change. So you really want to talk through, understand that, and figure out ways to get wins for your leadership, your customer base, but also move you in the right long-term direction to get you where you want to go. So that was a little bit of our spiel on where to start in the process. And then I think the next piece we wanted to do is do a little bit of lessons learned. And I'm going to tell you right up front, a lot of these are not rocket science. These are not like brand new ideas. But I do know, when Christine gets excited, gets ready to run, it's stepping back and doing a lot of good change management. A lot of this is but you're adjusting a mentality that's been going on for years and working with teams that have processes that have worked for them, they've been very happy with. You got to kind of take it an iterative approach and really think about it beyond, just the technology. And that's where I think the last bullet's probably the most important one out of this list is, it's looking at the people, the processes, the organization, and really treating it as an org change as you start to implement your zero trust technology and working with the different groups. Going back to the top, like any big change, gaining buy-in, and that's at all levels. I think we've seen some groups that focus on the execs a lot, which is great. Then they start to implement, and the tech teams just don't agree with some of it, or they think, based on their lens, this isn't the right way to go. You really got to work a strategy that touches all the different groups. And that gets into the second one, where you got to have a cross-functional team, and they all got to be working together up front, because we realize if pockets start to work, they get 3/4 of the way, they start to procure something and move forward, and then they talk to the other group, we forgot all about this other whole process that needs to implement, or this other requirement that we have, and now we're back to square zero. Including everybody up front from different perspectives is really critical with zero trust. Communication strategy. I think one of the biggest things that we're seeing across our customer base is demystifying a lot of what zero trust is. It's turned into such a buzzword that leadership's confused, technical groups understand it, but again, from a lot of their perspective, there's a lot of comms as part of this. I think one of the great things Christine did with one of our customers, she set up a couple all-day offsites and just walked them through different aspects of the architecture, starting with what are we doing, here's the technology. Let's talk about your use cases, because we don't know them all. Where are your concerns, and let's start voicing them early. But that comms approach is kind of a central piece to really moving forward. Agile. Everybody keeps hearing about Agile, but we've been uncovering all sorts of things as we move forward. Little things like one of our customers does all their OS scans agentless, based on being able to find you on the network. Well, if you all got all these little segments, you no longer can see them through your scanning tools, and now you got to buy some more agents. So, there's little things like that. A lot of the file shares and printers are all done by, discovering things on the network. If that doesn't work, how do we print? There's just not earth-changing. There's solutions to a lot of this, but you got to start testing. You got to get people into it with real-world problems to start uncovering a lot of this. And I think that gets me back to the end of, it's an org change problem. So as you start to implement the technology, don't forget about all these other aspects as you go forward.
Yeah, so one more thing and then we'll open up to questions is when we were doing the agile part of this, we were iterating and testing. One of our clients called me up very angry and said, "What are you doing? You're breaking my entire system. I can't get into anything. How dare you even try this whole zero trust? It's not going to work at all." And I said, "Oh, actually it did work. I'm very happy. I'm so happy that you cannot laterally move through your system anymore. This is great." So we started going through, like, what is it that's breaking? Well, it was remoting in for the help desk to remote into different computers. That they ride the network through lateral movement. So we had to find another solution for that. Oddly enough, VoIP also likes to use lateral movement within your system. So we found all of these different niches where, like Kevin says, it's not earth-shadowing. It's really easy to fix. You just have to find that workaround. So with that, does anyone have any questions for us? Or we can give you like a minute back. I don't know. I can do a silence. Yes. Are we seeing other departments what? Yeah, that's a good question. So basically you're asking, do I see shadow IAM technology all the time? Part of the problem is, right, some applications have native IAM tools attached to them. So that business owner has its own IAM product, really, because it's attached to that application. So what we have found, because we are trying to create a centralized IDP for one of our customers, we have to go through and we have to find an IDP that can work well with all of those other all of those other applications, so that we can have simplified sign-on throughout the system. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, kind of. The security generally
No, the answer is not always. I talked to a customer recently, and their general counsel owns IAM because it falls under risk management. I'm not saying that that's like the right way to go, but that's how they decided to do it. Any other questions? Yes.
What is the role of firewall and perimeter security in zero trust?
So what's the role of firewall? What are the rules for that? I'm kind of deferring more to you, but I mean, basically each of the applications has essentially its own little mini firewall around it. But I'll be honest, I am an identity person and not a network person, so I can't answer that question. Generally, you would use some sort of networking tool. That's a zero trust broker that creates encrypted tunnels between that application and the target application. So that would create the firewall rules around each of the applications. Yes, Rob?
Encryption, one of the big challenges that you often encounter in that approach is that it essentially breaks packet inspection,
Yeah.
the ability to do
Yep.
data loss prevention, those sorts of things.
Yep.
So is that, how do you address that challenge?
So the question is, if you have end-to-end encryption, then you need to sometimes open up that encryption and review it. How do you address that? So that is a very good question. And the answer is we're working on it. I like that question. Anyway, thank you so much. I see that our time is done. If you'd like to get a hold of us, our names are Kevin, Shaw, and Christina, and have a great day.